Welcome back, everyone, to the podcast. Today, we're diving deep into the life and incredible career of an actor whose presence on screen is nothing short of electrifying. We're talking about Sir Anthony Hopkins. Now, when I say that name, what comes to mind for you? Is it the chilling, calculated intellect of Hannibal Lecter? Or perhaps the heartbreaking, quiet despair of Stevens the butler in The Remains of the Day? Or maybe, more recently, the disorienting, profound vulnerability of a man succumbing to dementia in The Father. What's truly fascinating about Hopkins isn't just his immense talent, but the journey he took to get there, and the sheer longevity and versatility of his career. It's a story rooted in struggle, fueled by a burning need to escape, and ultimately defined by an extraordinary commitment to craft. Let's start at the very beginning, in the South Wales valleys. This isn't just any picturesque landscape. It's a place with a particular quality, an industrial bleakness, yet also a fierce communal pride. Think of those slag heaps, the chapels, the terraced houses, all crowded under skies that are more often gray than blue. This environment, for certain temperaments, sparks an intense desire to break free. It produced Richard Burton, another Welsh acting legend, and it certainly produced it in the young Anthony Hopkins. Born on New Year's Eve in 1937 in Margam, a district of Port Talbot, Hopkins grew up in a town utterly defined by industry. The steelworks, even today, dominate the shoreline, belching smoke, creating an atmosphere that's both beautiful and brutal. It wasn't a place that encouraged introspection or the cultivation of an interior life. Yet ironically, it was precisely the kind of pressure cooker where an interior life, under duress, could develop immense intensity. Hopkins himself has repeatedly admitted he was a difficult, solitary child. His school days were, by his own account, unproductive. He'd rather lose himself in art, painting, drawing, or playing the piano than focus on his studies. He was dyslexic, though undiagnosed at the time, and the struggle to read, watching his classmates breeze through lessons, left deep scars. In a 2002 interview, he confessed, "I was a poor learner, which left me open to ridicule and gave me an inferiority complex. I grew up absolutely convinced I was stupid." Can you imagine that? A future knighted, Oscar-winning actor, convinced he was stupid as a child. It's a powerful reminder that our early struggles often become the unexpected fuel for later triumphs. His relationship with his father, a baker, was also complex. It was loving in its own way, but expressed more through expectation and discipline than tenderness. There's a pivotal moment Hopkins recalls from when he was 17. His father, perhaps dismissively, perhaps trying to provoke, said, "I don't know what's going to happen to you." Hopeless. And Hopkins in that moment took a step back and declared, "One day I'll show you." That remark, that offhand dismissal, lodged itself deep in his consciousness. It became one of the primary engines of his extraordinary career. He's returned to it in countless interviews over 6 decades, not with bitterness, but with a surprising gratitude for the provocation. It was the spark that ignited his ambition. To instill discipline, his parents sent him to boarding schools, but they didn't really educate him in the traditional sense, nor did he particularly distinguish himself academically. But what these schools couldn't suppress was something quietly developing, an extraordinary ear for music, a natural gift for the piano, and the very first stirrings of an imaginative life that would eventually find its true home on stage. Then came an encounter that truly changed everything: Richard Burton. At 15, Hopkins met his fellow Welsh actor, who by then was already a star. Burton, from the same valleys, with the same accents, had taken everything Provençal about his origin and transformed it into universal art. For the young Hopkins, it was seismic. If Burton could do it, then the door wasn't entirely closed for him either. This brief meeting was the encouragement Hopkins needed. Inspired by Burton, Hopkins enrolled at the Royal Welsh College of Music and Drama at just 15. His proficiency at the piano won him a scholarship, Music, that quiet talent, literally opened the door through which drama eventually walked. This connection between music and acting, the musician's attention to timing, rhythm, silence, and the actor's manipulation of these same elements for character, would run like an underground river through Hopkins's entire career. After graduating, he spent 2 years in the British Army. For a generation of British actors, military service offered something theater schools couldn't: an acquaintance with collective life, discipline as a daily practice, and for a solitary, restless temperament like Hopkins, the experience of subordinating individual will to a collective purpose. He would later describe this kind of submission as central to an actor's art. Then it was on to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, RADA, in London. Here the boy who thought he was stupid graduated as a silver medalist. His drama instructor, Robinson Stone, who also taught Denzel Washington later, wouldn't have been surprised. Hopkins was, as they say, a natural. In 1965, after several years in repertory theater, the legendary Sir Laurence Olivier spotted him and invited him to join the Royal National Theatre. Hopkins became Olivier's understudy. Now, this wasn't a polite, deferential understudying. When Olivier was struck with appendicitis during a production of Strindberg's The Dance of Death, Hopkins stepped in and seized the role with a ferocity that astonished everyone. Olivier, rather than feeling threatened, responded with the generosity of true greatness. In his memoir, he wrote that a new young actor in the company of exceptional promise, named Anthony Hopkins, was understudying me and walked away with the part of Edgar like a cat with a mouse between its teeth. From the greatest classical actor of the 20th century, this wasn't just praise, it was a clear passing of the torch. The National Theatre years were crucial. Hopkins was building the technical foundations that would sustain one of cinema's most prolific careers. He learned what classical theater teaches its best students: that the most powerful performances come not from emotional display, but from the precise control of language, rhythm, and physical stillness. Morgan Freeman, reflecting on Hopkins's work in The Remains of the Day, later called this eloquent stillness, the capacity to let life happen rather than performing it. His film career began with smaller roles, but by 1968 he was in The Lion in Winter, holding his own alongside giants like Peter O'Toole and Katharine Hepburn. He was only in his early 30s, and it was clear his gifts translated to the screen with unusual completeness. But then came what I call the wilderness years, his battle with alcoholism. To gloss over this would be to tell an incomplete, comfortable, and ultimately misleading story. For nearly a decade, drinking was the dominant fact of his life, and his eventual, hard-won victory is as much a part of his artistic legacy as any performance. Hopkins himself said, "I led a pretty self-destructive life for a few decades. It was only after I put my demons behind me that I was able to fully enjoy acting." The drinking escalated through the late 60s and 70s, fueled by professional pressure, personal instability, and a theatrical culture where heavy drinking was often celebrated. He recounts a harrowing incident in California. "Suddenly I was here in California, and I was driving with my car blackout drunk. Couldn't remember where I'd been. I woke up, I thought, I'm gonna die, or I'm going to take someone with me. I'll kill somebody. I remember saying to someone, I need help." In 1975, he began attending Alcoholics Anonymous. His recovery wasn't a single event, but a profound process. It gave him a clarity and acceptance that would eventually manifest in his art. The performances from the 90s onwards, that inhabited stillness, that sense of a man who has plumbed the depths and returned with precise knowledge, are deeply connected to what he learned in those AA meetings and his nearly 50 years of sobriety. At one point, having lived in Hollywood for years, he almost gave up on a career there. He came back to Britain, resigned, saying, "Well, that part of my life's over. It's a chapter closed. I suppose I'll just have to settle for being a respectable actor, poncing around the West End, and doing respectable BBC work for the rest of my life." It was the honest, if somewhat bleak assessment of a man who had looked at himself and found less than he'd hoped. As it turned out, He was entirely wrong. During the 70s and 80s, British television became his medium. Its intimate scale, character-driven narratives, and demand for psychological precision played to his strengths. He won an Emmy for his role as Bruno Richard Hauptmann in the Lindbergh kidnapping case in 1976, and continued to impress critics, winning multiple Emmys and a BAFTA. These performances of real historical figures, navigating moral complexity, were rehearsals for a career-long preoccupation with biography. He'd go on to portray Richard Nixon, Pablo Picasso, Alfred Hitchcock, Pope Benedict XVI, and Sigmund Freud. He discovered that the real isn't limiting, but liberating. When the exterior facts are given, the interior architecture becomes the artist's creative territory. And that's where Hopkins excels. In cinema, the 80s brought The Elephant Man, 1980, where he played Dr. Frederick Treves, the Victorian surgeon who befriends Joseph Merrick. It was precisely the kind of role Hopkins could make extraordinary. A man of conventional decency, forced to examine its limits. This performance, the studio later acknowledged, persuaded director Jonathan Demme to cast him as Hannibal Lecter a decade later. 84 Charing Cross Road, 1987, was another masterclass in economy, revealing everything through what wasn't said. And then, The Monster in the Cell, The Silence of the Lambs, 1991. When Hopkins first received the screenplay, he thought it was for a children's film. He was in London doing a play. 10 pages in, he called his agent back, asking if it was a real offer, because he declared, "This is the best script I've ever read." This script demanded everything Hopkins had spent 3 decades preparing. Hannibal Lecter, the imprisoned cannibal psychiatrist, a figure of intelligence, culture, and absolute evil, required an actor who could hold a paradox at the center of the performance. The charm and the menace had to be simultaneous and inseparable, because the horror of Lecter is precisely that one is the instrument of the other. Hopkins's preparation was meticulous. He studied real-life serial killers, visited prisons, and met with convicted murderers to dig into the psychology. He even attended court hearings for grisly murders. He found parallels between Lecter and HAL 9000, the chilling AI from 2001: The Space Odyssey, a highly intelligent, coldly calculating killing machine. He also drew inspiration from a RADA teacher, Christopher Fettis, who had a cutting voice and would slice you to pieces with his precise analysis. One brilliant detail came from a friend who rarely blinked, which unnerved everyone around him. Hopkins adopted this reptilian stillness for Lecter, suggesting a creature operating by entirely different laws. He also convinced director Jonathan Demme and the costume designer that Lecter would be more clinical and unsettling in pure white, an idea he got from his own fear of dentists. He even improvised the iconic visual of Lecter's first appearance. "I said, I'd like to be standing there. I can smell her coming down the corridor," he shared. The image of Lecter perfectly centered, perfectly still, smiling with infinite patience, is indelible. Jodie Foster, his co-star, recalled the chill that came over the room during their first read-through. Hopkins even improvised mocking her accent in their first scene, generating a genuinely shocked, authentic reaction from Foster, who later thanked him for it. The film swept the 5 biggest Academy Awards, a feat only achieved twice before. Hopkins, in his early 50s, was launched into a new phase of his career. His Best Actor win for The Silence of the Lambs is, according to Guinness World Records, the shortest lead performance to ever win, with barely 25 minutes of screen time. It remains one of the most efficient deployments of actorly genius in Academy Awards history. The 1990s became his golden decade. Instead of chasing blockbusters, he followed Lecter with The Remains of the Day, 1993, arguably the exact opposite of Lecter. As Stevens, the repressed English butler, Hopkins delivered a performance of immense aching restraint, a man who buries his emotional life so completely he loses love before he even recognizes it. Morgan Freeman, as I mentioned earlier, called this eloquent stillness and a profound lesson for his own acting. Oscar nominations continued, for Nixon, 1995, where he created a psychologically deep portrait of the disgraced president, and for Amistad, 1997, playing John Quincy Adams, delivering a climactic legal argument. He also gave one of his warmest performances as C.S. Lewis in Shadowlands, 1993, showing a man whose intellectual defenses against grief are dismantled by love. As the millennium turned, Hopkins expanded his range further. He reprised Lecter in Hannibal and Red Dragon, but these weren't the creative core. He was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II in 1993, received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 2003, and became a U.S. citizen in 2000, reflecting his life in California, where he found sobriety and peace. The World's Fastest Indian 2005 showed a warmer, funnier, more openly generous Hopkins. From 2016 to 2018, he played Robert Ford in HBO's Westworld, a role built for his gifts, combining scientist, artist, god, and tyrant. In The Two Popes 2019, his nuanced portrayal of Pope Benedict XVI was among his later career highlights. Then came The Father, 2020, a performance many consider the apex of his career. The film places the audience inside the consciousness of a man with advanced dementia. Rooms shift, faces change, time fragments. It's a formally radical film, demanding an actor who could inhabit that radical challenge, to play confusion from the inside, showing a mind losing its architecture while the audience watches it fall apart. At 83, Hopkins won his second Oscar for The Father, making him the oldest person to be awarded an acting Oscar. He wasn't even watching the ceremony. He was asleep in England. This record sits alongside his Guinness record for the shortest winning performance, showcasing his incredible range. Critics described his performance not just as acting, but as such total absorption that the distinction between performance and lived experience dissolved. He found in the disorientation of dementia something he recognized, a self losing its moorings, adrift from its own story, a journey in a sense he had made in reverse during his years of alcoholism. What's truly striking about Hopkins in his 80s isn't just the awards, but the sheer volume and variety of his work and the evident pleasure he takes in it. In 2023, he starred in One Life and Freud's Last Session. In 2024, he played Herod the Great in Mary. This pace would be extraordinary for an actor of 40, let alone 87. He explains it simply: acting is not a burden, but a liberation, a place where the difficulties of being Anthony Hopkins are suspended, and he can become someone else entirely. His later years have also brought remarkable public generosity of spirit. He's spoken openly about his mental health struggles, his alcoholism, and making peace with a difficult past. His memoir, We Did Okay, Kid, confronts every part of his life with candor. The title itself, warm, rueful, precise, is the verdict of a man who has made the difficult calculation about his own life, and found it, on balance, more than acceptable. He also remains deeply connected to Wales, donating £1 million to preserve Snowdonia National Park. He paints, he composes music, describing these not as hobbies, but as essential sustenance, maintaining contact with the aesthetic impulse that has driven him his entire life. The boy who preferred the piano and sketchbook to the classroom never stopped being that boy. To understand Hopkins's art, it's important to understand what he is not. He is emphatically not a method actor in the Stanislavskian tradition of total immersion. He views acting as a craft, requiring thorough preparation, precise technical execution, and being present in the moment without clutching at predetermined emotional responses. His approach is exhaustive preparation, followed by apparent spontaneity, with the technical scaffolding invisible behind the natural-seeming performance. He learned this from Olivier, respect for the craft of appearing not to act. He famously said, when asked how he played Lecter, just stood still and didn't blink. And for the butler in The Remains of the Day, well, just be very quiet. It's no big deal, he says. This isn't false modesty. It's his artistic philosophy. The actor's task is not to feel the emotions, but to find the precise external expression that allows the audience to feel them instead. He is a well-known mimic, adept at transforming his native Welsh accent into whatever a character requires. This gift for language, for the music of speech, for the precise calibration of accent and rhythm and pause, is the technical foundation of everything. The voice of Hannibal Lecter, that cold, precisely modulated instrument of terror, isn't an improvisation, it's an architectural achievement, designed note by note, executed with the certainty of a musician. So what is the legacy of Anthony Hopkins? He has broken records, inhabited unplayable characters, played kings, killers, gods, and broken men. He's won 2 Oscars separated by nearly 3 decades, across a range so wide they seem to have been won by different people. Yet perhaps his greatest legacy isn't just the awards or the iconic roles, but the quiet, profound artistry of making the impossible look effortless. It's the masterclass in disappearing into a role so completely that the acting itself becomes invisible, leaving only the raw, undeniable truth of the character.